This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular, advance your lean journey, and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dick Beyer, and you're not. This is the Lean Construction Blog podcast. And now I'm debuting my new studio by just hanging out in my house and not having a false background and a green screen. So everybody write in and see how you like the new look. Today, we have the great pleasure of being joined by, I seem to always say this, one of my close friends, Mark Konchar. Mark has been with Balfour Beatty since I met him, but he's got a long and storied tradition in not only the lean community, but the hockey community. And he's just one of the great guys in the Western world. And so we thought we would go today through some of his journey, which has been remarkable. And now, and also talk about the future of light and heavy rail in the States, because he's heading up the heavy rail or just the rail division at Balfour Beatty. So
sure.
Good afternoon, Mark. How are you?
Yes, good afternoon. Great to see you. And I do like the studio.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've got some, I'm ready to go with all of my little band and instruments and stuff. But enough about me. Let's get on to you. I met you at Balfour Beatty, and you, me, and Rex Miller. I think maybe I met you through Rex. Mm-hmm. And we kicked off quite a campaign inside of Balfour to incorporate some of the changes, because you guys had bought some companies and you had some different culture things happening. Right. And we had a pretty good trip there for a while. But you grew up, I know, in Michigan, and then moved to outside of Pittsburgh. And you went on to Penn State. So tell us a little bit about Penn State, because I think there's some good stories there.
Well, you're right. I mean, love Michigan. Growing up there, I was actually born in Pittsburgh, stayed there for about 2 years, and then went to Michigan for several years, which is where I got into hockey. And hockey is the coolest sport, and I love it for many, many reasons. But as I got older and into it, I loved it because it was more team-based, and it was certainly, physically grueling and highly competitive, fast, all the good reasons. But it always came back to team. And I was lucky enough to spend some time in Pittsburgh, and started my college career at St. Bonaventure, up in small school up in New York, Southern New York, studying engineering, and was able to play hockey there before I transferred to Penn State.
The Bonnies.
Yeah, that's right, St. Bonnies. And really fell in love with Penn State. Was there for 4 or 5 years. In undergrad, I studied architectural engineering, and that's where I met Victor Sanvito, which is a huge piece to certainly where I am today. I have a lot of gratitude and respect for Victor and his family, because he took me under his wing there when I ended my undergraduate work. At the time, this was in 1994, and frankly, the offer to go to graduate school to work in the PhD program under Victor, working tightly with CII as part of a massive research program, turned out to be the best offer and the best choice for me at the time. Really got to know Victor. Was there for additional 3 years, working on project delivery system research. And frankly, still to this day, that is the lens by which I look at the industry in a lot of ways, and enter a lot of the discussions and the learning, frankly, that I've had over the years. But one of the things about Penn State is you can do, like many universities, you can dabble in a lot of areas, and the expertise there is wide and far. So I was able to build a nice network, which, I didn't know it at the time, how vital it was and how valuable it was, but it's still there. And Victor and I still work alongside each other in a lot of different ways. So that was great.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Victor on the podcast, but he says, I don't want people to know about me. So we have to kind of circle around in my head. He turned out a number of folks out of that program, including your buddy Bevan Mace and a bunch of others.
That's
who have
right.
been really influential in the community. And I don't know of anybody, perhaps other than Greg or Glenn, that's been more behind the scenes important to our community than Victor. He's a
You're
terrific
right.
guy.
Special kind of person, that's for sure. And his reach is wide and far. The time there in grad school and in post grad actually had to kick me out because I would have just stayed on as a post grad doing small projects. It's such a great place to be. But I was fortunate enough to play hockey there as well, and met some wonderful folks. Coach Joe Batista, who's still a dear friend today. Played undergraduate there, and then became a graduate assistant coach, which was a turning point for me in a lot of ways. I mean, like anybody that loves a sport, I suppose the only reason I got into it was to stay on the ice, to go to the rink, to be around the team, to participate in the program, whatever it took to get into the rink. That's what it was. And
It's one of those rink rats.
yeah, at the time, it turned out to be 4 years as a graduate assistant coach, and
Wow.
a lot of my buddies were there, finishing up, and that was interesting. I learned a ton, and it's a transition, frankly, for me because I love learning. I love to teach and coach. I know it now. I didn't know it then, and it turned out that I went on to coach and still coach today. 20 something plus years later.
Well,
I got so into it.
you've not only been coaching your kids, but you've been coaching teams for the last 20 years as well. I mean, I think
True.
you're a natural born coach, and we shouldn't let it go by that you're actually in the Penn State Hockey Hall of Fame, which I think is one of the cool things in a community that's dominated by intellectuals and people who watch things. You've been really out there scrapping, so it's fantastic. And actually, 2 podcasts ago, I don't know if you know a guy named Mark Seachy. He's a big BIM guy up here
Okay.
in Canada.
Yeah.
And he actually played for the Boston Bruins before he got hurt.
Wow.
So there is a synergy on the podcast over the last couple of episodes with our hockey guys.
Very good.
And I was the play-by-play hockey announcer at Middlebury College, so let's not let that go by.
That's right.
All right, so you were at Penn State, and CII is the Construction Industry Institute that is part of the AGC, I think, right? Funded through them, but an independent organization.
I believe so. I believe you're right there.
And a lot of universities participate, and they do some big research things. But the first work that you actually published, I still think you can buy this on Amazon, is the book that you and Victor did on construction project delivery, that focused at the time on design build, because there really was, maybe if IPD had been around, you still would have focused on design build, but you did focus on collaborative construction delivery processes. So how did you start moving in that direction?
Well, it's like luck of the draw, frankly. I mean, that project hit time-wise right when I was, entering the doctoral program and needed a big chunk of research, and the funding hit. Victor built a team, and I ended up being one of the lead researchers on it. And interestingly, at the time, this again was in early to mid 90s, more early, frankly, that design build was just coming on the scene. DBIA, you might remember, through Preston Haskell and the crew were gaining momentum. Clients, at least the more enlightened clients, were headed that direction. Yet there wasn't any empirical evidence, Dick, in the industry to help people make better project delivery choices, right? So CII, to their credit, put a major emphasis and chunk of money on the table to basically fund the first empirical research on project delivery in the US. And it compared, at the time, design build, design bid build, and construction management at risk. And it was quite the methodology that was created. There was a big board that governed it. And 3 years later, we ended up analyzing over 350 projects in the States. And the results were groundbreaking in a lot of ways. It changed legislation. DBIA rode that wave for quite a while in a good way, began their education series to help the industry really go down the more collaborative track.
Yeah, so that's given the transition, I think of that kind of early 80s period as a transition to a more market-oriented kind of economy. We went from a very kind of traditional American relationship. You work for a company, you work for the same company for years, and in the Reagan years, that stuff started to change into more focus on markets and competition and things like that. I'm not completely convinced that that was a great thing that happened to us, especially in the professions, but it certainly did start shaking things up so we could look at some of these traditional processes. And I think AIA kind of lost their battle as clerk of the works back in those days as we moved into different contract delivery methods. But you were right there at the forefront of the whole DBIA movement, and then you and Victor began segueing your way out of DBIA and into the Lean Construction Institute, or more into the lean area. So how did that happen? How did that happen?
I think it was more learning about what the research was telling us and what the industry was actually doing, and furthermore, where could we help make the most progress or movement into more collaborative or integrated projects. And at the time that work came out, we went on the road and we were offering wherever we could, just classes, seminars. We'd go into companies and help educate where we could. We wrote articles, we wrote books, and that all was fine, but it really became clear that in order to get some momentum and change the way delivery happens, we needed those big industry vehicles. DBIA at the time was certainly one of them, and I'm indebted to DBIA because they helped me greatly for years, and they still do. I still know the folks over there, Lisa and the gang, and they're doing great things. And we used that entity to help just be the voice for collaborative delivery. And about the time that I left the university and got into Centex Construction at the time, which was later acquired by Balfour Beatty, as you said, in 2007, LCI and the lean movement was really doing the same thing. It was grassroots. It was coming on, and there was this feeling that there was another way to be more productive, to get teams to do that together, to learn together and execute together. And those two combined, there were several years there where we joined up the conversation between LCI and DBIA. I actually remember Victor and I did a lean in design build keynote at one of the main DBIA events, and it got, as you would expect, some really good reviews and some eyebrows went up, right? Because it was kind of two modes coming together, and and for me that was a good indication that there was something there and that we could really double down. And I needed to get more educated on all things lean and where it could help. It could help me personally. It could help the company I was working with. So I doubled down and tried to get educated. That's where I really met folks like you and got invited into the conversation at LCI, which was a blessing as well.
Well, what's funny is that when I took over at LCI, part of my mission was to go hang out with people like Lisa Franklin and go hang out at the AGC and go hang out with the AIA folks, so that they knew that we were complementary, that our job was not to supplant them. And I think, to our credit, and you continued that tradition as chairman of the board, we have never tried to commercialize a contract model or any of these other things. I think LCI has always been pretty agnostic around how you form the team, and it's really been a great gathering place for ideas about that seem to release people. You go to one of those LCI congresses, and I've never been in a place where people go skipping and dancing and jumping out of there, so happy to go home with all these new ideas and getting, really excited about stuff. It's always been one of the marvels of those congresses, and you certainly helped lead that.
Well, there's an interesting thing. I'll never forget when we were producing and presenting the results of the research and particularly talking to clients, right? Obviously, the data showed that design build was more empirically favored over the other two systems, both in time, cost, quality, and some of the other collaborative factors, and sometimes significantly, depending on the metric. However, it's not to say that a project couldn't be delivered successfully using design bid build or CM at risk. Quite the opposite. It just was less likely under the same circumstances.
Right.
But owners every day, project teams every day are out there doing good work, and they're being successful using those systems. And that was a real eye opener for me, right? It wasn't one only approach. And, when you add in the mentality and the thinking or the philosophy from the lean world to that equation, it really does open up opportunities, right? Because you always have to play the hand you're dealt, and every project's custom. I mean, that's been driven into my head by the John Tarpys of the world for years, right? Every situation's unique. And, if you're in a situation that is less than ideal in terms of commercial terms or project delivery, there still is a way to make it successful, and it comes down to the people involved.
Yeah, I've got a good friend up here, Gesa Bomfai, who's the lawyer that kind of manages all the IPD contracts up here. He's on the committee that drafts them and stuff. And he made a really interesting observation that, even with a bad contract, good people still deliver great projects. And even with a great contract, bad people still deliver horrible projects. And it really is a focus. It's always been a focus on the people, right? And the understanding about them. And I think that the one thing that we've always tried to do is we've tried to move towards a more collaborative contracting culture, because it tends to align those interests between people that used to be in silos contractually. And they never had an incentive, a commercial incentive anyway, to cooperate with people. And yet they did, because they're people and they're human, and that's what humans do, right?
That's true.
So yeah, Talking Heads song, that's what humans do. We could get right into that. So what's funny is that, the real emergence of the Lean Construction Institute Congresses, I think, was the one that you were the chair of in Alexandria, when we broke out of the Love Fest in Boulder with the Birkenstock, the Birkenstocks and the sweaters that always smelled like old wood stoves, and telling stories with banjos and stuff. I think that was really how we began to kind of rocket into prominence. But with that also comes, the loss of that Love Fest, which is really awesome back there. And
that's true.
One of the reasons I like doing this podcast is because I think that when we lost Greg, we lost the great storyteller of our community. And I think we want to archive those stories. So we want to know what Mark Konchar did. We want to know what Dean Reed did, and those guys. So as you moved into Balfour Beatty, what was the challenge for you? Well, you were at Centex first, and then that got absorbed.
Well, true. I mean, like anything, you get humbled right away, and you still do almost every day. But I joined Centex in '99, again coming right out of the graduate world at Penn State, which couldn't be further than the construction world, and I recognized that pretty quickly. I joined as an assistant superintendent on, at the time, our first design build job downtown DC. One of the goals that the team had was to break into the DC market, and that was it. So we did a big design build job for the National Academy of Sciences, beautiful building, tough design, and I was out chasing concrete and learning very fast about what I didn't know. Okay, so that was great, a key part for me. Spent several years in the field, but at the same time, was very curious about the front end of the business in terms of how projects became projects, and how they were won, and the strategy behind them, how teams were built, and things of that nature. So I quickly transitioned into the business acquisition world to learn the front end. As I said, all things, pre-con and estimating, sales and procurement, and for us to go deeper into collaborative delivery, we needed to start a small design build offering and group, right? And at the time, between John Tarpy and Leon Blon and several other leaders in the division there, they said, "Oh, let's go do it. Go give it a try." And we went on a nice run, trying to build out processes and teaching people, bringing on folks that could help, and winning jobs, all around Virginia and DC, which was great. So for me, it was enlightening. Learned a ton. Again, made a ton of mistakes, which happens, and fortunately, I had good people around me that helped coach along the way and keep us out of trouble, in terms of big trouble. But then everything changed, right? We were purchased by Balfour Beatty, and the world was much bigger and badder by having a UK parent and several other sister companies around the US, and an appetite to make it bigger and stronger. So I think you mentioned we went on an acquisition and merger spree there for several years, and Um, I was very intrigued by some of the companies that were joining the portfolio, particularly the ones that were engineering and design based, because I felt like our design partners in the community are hugely important to how success can be run on a project. So I went on and started a group called the National Integration Group, and really our mission in life was to go hunt and figure out what the best of the best were doing out in the industry, and particularly within our own sister companies, and start the integration between them all, and figure out where the synergies could add value to what we were doing. So that was exciting, but it was also a challenge, to get back to your question, because it was everything you can imagine. Cultures were very different. Motives were very different. We were at different points in terms of our, where the legacy companies were versus where the new companies were. So it was very challenging. It was an eye opener to what I would call just organizational dynamics that I had never been exposed to.
And what I thought was cool about that, because I got exposed to most of those companies, at least the construction companies, the Barnharts and the guys up in the Pacific Northwest and the kind of Florida division, and they each had substantially different cultures. I mean, they had all come from a very different view of how the world actually operates. And they're all doing the same stuff. And I always thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I think that national integration piece gave us all an opportunity to think about how important culture is actually in the workplace. When you wake up in the morning and you put on a logoed shirt and a logoed hard hat and a logoed rain jacket, and you get in your logoed truck, and on your logoed radio, you're calling your logoed friends. There is something about building that seamless culture that when you merge with other companies who have a completely different culture, really interesting things happen.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, thinking back, I believe there was 5 or 6 entities that were acquired in that window of time, around the country. Not to mention the big one that came on much later, which was Parsons Brinkerhoff, which was then divested several years later. But it's very enlightening, but it's also can be very disruptive when you try to mash together, organizations.
Yeah, in some ways, you guys were the precursor to Katerra, but you were building it from the construction side. So I always wondered how that acquiring a design firm or a design and engineering firm, especially somebody that big, because there are cultural divides between construction companies, but there's a Grand Canyon between how designers think about things and how constructors think about things. There's a gene inside every good superintendent that just says, go, 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 go. Let's go. Come on. Why are we waiting? What's happening? And there's a gene inside every designer that goes, if I could just have a little more time to think about this, it just might be, I don't know. What do you guys think? So good on you, man, because I think you got to see some of that, those really diverse ways of doing things, and the companies that we worked for. I mean, working for Disney and working for Parkland, those were 2 completely different experiences.
Yeah, very true. Same way with Intel, which was a great period of time where you and I got to work closely together and to solve a puzzle, with Intel, who were pretty bold at the time in terms of wanting to change their culture, their presence in the community, but also to really change the way they operated, right?
Yeah. And it really was funny. I mean, that's where we got to meet. That's where at least I got to meet that crazy scallywag, Amy Marks, who continues to be just 7,000 pounds of energy rolled up like the sun coming down the street. That woman is remarkable, what she's able to do. But it was really, I thought what was really interesting about that project is that here we're trying to find out, what are the source of costing. And you remember they had Florida Daniels going around the world and trying to buy stuff cheaper for them, and they could save like maybe 5%. And when we really got into, I think, probably the most effective target value design process that I've ever been engaged in.
Yeah, you're right.
We took like 45% out of their costs. It was killer.
it was a waste. It was a waste hunt, that's for sure. And waste is a tough term sometimes, because really they were rethinking their process and the way they were gonna manufacture, process, and build. And it was game changing. I mean, so much so that, to their credit, they had to pull people out of the mainstream of their business and almost put them in a vacuum to do this work, right? Because it would be too difficult to do it when they're under the normal pressure or within the normal culture. So I think it was quite enlightening for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were able to take. I think people always say we don't have time to. It reminds me of that cartoon with the square wheels. We don't have time to think about this. We had 3 or 4 months there where their team was in that big room with us, and we had trades in from Portland, and we had people from all over the world helping us.
Yeah, it was, thinking back on that, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? And I think they've taken forward those results and are doing their darndest to implement and make it come to life.
I think when you look for examples about a push system or a pull system, I think what Intel had done was so classically a push system. Said, we need to have a waffle slab here, so we might as well have a waffle slab for the entire production facility, no matter what that costs. And we want to have triple redundancy because we can't afford to go down. And they didn't think about it as like modularization or having plug and play. They just thought about it as a line moving forward. And that's really what a push system is, right? You just encounter a problem, and without thinking about the system, you just do that, rather than the pull system saying, here's our outcome. What are the valuable parts of that? Maybe 25% of that waffle slab, maybe. So I thought that was really cool. It was fun to work with you on that one as well. It was fun to work in Glendale with the Imagineers as well.
Right.
That was a hit.
That's true.
Yeah, we're really
so that's a good reminder. There was a period there, and still is in a lot of ways, that I would conspire to succeed with folks like you, because sometimes you could leap forward with progress with others even quicker than internally, right? And it takes an army in a lot of ways, right? So you just reminded me that whole Disney experience was another example of just using partners and friends to help spread the good word.
Yeah, and learning so much, having you gave me the opportunity. You put me on a retainer, and then I was on a retainer from LCI at about the same time. So I didn't really have to go get business. I could just go help out wherever it was needed. And I think the work that we did in the Florida division to implement the last planner system throughout there, that was another great success. I think it was so much fun hanging around with you, man. I miss you.
Well, that's true. I think actually the first project that we met each other on, I think formally, was with Bernita, if I'm not mistaken, when we won
Stuart, Florida.
Down in East Florida. Yeah.
Stuart, Florida, home of the sail fishing capital of the world or something.
Right.
Yeah. That was quite a time. That was pretty funny because
that darn group, I think they were convinced they were going to go a certain pathway with integrated delivery, and then they came to the mountaintop where they had to decide if they were going to be collaborative with the trades or not. Right. I remember that meeting where it was kind of a come to Jesus discussion.
Well, you remember that the weekend before that, the CEO had been playing golf with a plumber. These plumbers, and I got to play Medina with an electrician, because these guys do really well out there. And he was playing golf with the plumber, and he was going, I was thinking of bringing in all the trades. I had this like kumbaya thing, and we're all collaborating. And the plumber said to him, "Are you nuts? This is the most competitive market we have ever seen. You're going to be leaving millions of dollars on the table if you just don't go pound on people." It was like,
not helpful.
How did we not get that guy going?
Smart at the time, right? I mean, everybody, you got to make your choices.
So over the past few years, you've been innovation, the chief of innovation, or the chief of whatever, just one of the chiefs. And so what have you focused on? Bring us up to date on where you were, and then
Okay.
we'll talk about rail separately because I think that's a whole topic that's very
Yeah,
cool.
sure. I mean, look, these strategies evolved inside Balfour in the, now maybe 13, 14, 2015-ish. We were through that acquisition phase, and we were more into trying to sort out how can we leverage the whole of the enterprise, the portfolio and all the offices that were now integrated. And we had a better view and clarity to what we were all about, right? So we went into a mode of trying to leverage the corporate center to serve the divisions in a bigger, better way. And we started really a lot of efforts. And one of them was a chief of enterprise development, which tried to bring the very best that the divisions had to bear elsewhere. Okay, so it was a little bit of a bumblebee theory where you would find a practice, a process, an innovative idea, a story to tell, and the job was to let others know about it in the other divisions and apply it on projects as soon as possible. Okay, that quickly morphed into an innovation role or chief of innovation role, which is difficult and tricky in a lot of ways to understand in a construction company because we're not a product-based company, we're a service provider. So innovation looks and feels different. It's more process oriented. It's more refining, the good that you have, or eliminating, steps, if you will, or applying technology, or teaching. Frankly, just teaching different ways that the problems could be solved. So it was very collaborative, or tried to be in a lot of ways. But it was hard. It was, kind of candidly, it was slow, right? It was very cultural at the time. Not a lot of people understood it at the onset. We probably didn't do a great job rolling it out and fanning the flame early, but it was a good run, and I feel like we learned and made some good progress. That then quickly moved as time went on, and we unwound some of those later strategies into 18, 19, 20. The market was really changing at the time, and it was all about winning the key targets, the strategic projects. So it became more of an emphasis on strategic targets and procurement. We also started the supply chain engagement program for Balfour Beatty, which is basically an outreach to 40 or 50 of our key suppliers and trade partners to try to leverage, again, the bigger whole for projects and for clients. So those became the more recent areas of focus.
Well, that makes sense because that's what begins to insulate you from the, we talk a lot in the lean community about variation being not a very good thing, but it's at the heart of every business, variation. Things are up and down, and there's not a lot that you can do to smooth it out unless you get so big and comply and have incorporated so many parts of the supply chain like Toyota that you really insulated yourself from almost any any market things. So as that chief enterprise officer, what did you guys do? What did you do specifically during the COVID times and these things that were happening? With you talk about supply chain pressures. That's not only supply. I mean, it's every supply chain, whether it's workers in the trades, whether it's the trades themselves, whether it's getting concrete, whether it's getting concrete to the site, getting steel, getting things moved across borders, and then the Trump tariffs on aluminum and things like that had a really deleterious effect in Canada on construction, and yet the business was booming. So in this time of, there's a group up here called the Altus Group who does an annual construction survey. And they said from May of last year until March of this year, we've seen across the board 16% escalation in prices and like a 50% greater scarcity of things. Even if you want to pay for it, you can't get it. So how did that all affect you guys?
Well, it's been a wild ride for everybody, and fortunately, knock on wood, a lot of the projects, which is where the rubber meets the road, we're in a good position entering that period, right? I guess you could call it either good planning or good luck in a lot of ways, right? Timing's everything. Because we did have projects that were very early in their cycle shut down or pause, right? Before the big expenditures or purchase agreements needed to be made. But the teams, again, you got to hand it to, like you said, the folks in the field and that were closest to the coal face did an amazing job, both keeping projects open, and working to the best of their ability through that long period, and helping clients try to navigate the risk that was now staring them in the face through different agreements with the suppliers to securing materials early, changing commercial terms to allow the teams to have more flexibility. All anything and everything were new solutions, right? I was actually quite impressed that it didn't get more litigious during that period. Not saying that everybody walked through it with roses because it was tough, but we were very fortunate that the community rallied to get work done because people wanted to stay working. They didn't want to be shelved.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. Everybody has taken a business law class somewhere along the line, and they came they read into their textbooks this thing called force majeure, and nobody ever knew what that was. Well, that's what it is. A pandemic hits, or locusts take over a city, or the Walking Dead rise up from the middle of the expanded soil, and I think that was the thing that hit everybody, because I remember the day that we were shutting down up here was Friday the 13th in March, and in Ontario they said, well, we're going to close everything down for a couple of weeks and just let this thing simmer. And 2 years later, like last week, they just got rid of the mask mandate, and yet still people are wandering around in masks like crazy up here. It's funny.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, we're trying to build some projects, and we're trying to get ahead of the supply chain. So it's amazing how innovative people can be if you bring them on. So we've got an IPD project up here where we got the steel guy on a Saturday, and he had an order to the mill by the following Thursday as a placeholder. He just ordered a whole bunch of stuff that he thought was going to be probably needed. So he crazy over ordered, but at least he got us in line. And so that helped us mitigate the effect of this thing on schedule right off the bat. And I don't think you could, unless you were in a really agile kind of project delivery mode, I'm not sure you could really do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you guys are international, so you've seen other collaborative project deliveries. There's that kind of partnering thing that they have in the UK. There's alliancing from Australia.
That's right.
People out west are doing a lot of progressive design build. Is the DBIA involved in progressive design build? Is that a movement that they've taken to heart, or is that something that folks in the West have just devised as a way of trying to get more collaborative when they can't do IPD projects because of the local statutes and things?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, my sense is that it's a little bit of both. It almost has to be, right? I mean, I feel like from DBI's vantage point, although I haven't asked them directly or recently, that progressive design build really can be and ought to be a best practice, right? Just it comes down to the contracting or the commercial terms, right? Which is where people tend to draw a hard line. However, the behaviors and the startup of these projects, the first 100 days, so to speak, you have the most ability to shape the project culture and as you taught me, identify as many of the unknowns as early as possible together, right? And if progressive design build is the formula for a situation or a client, then great, right? You're right. The West might be disguising it, right now, but again, I came to know a long time ago, probably way too late, frankly, but that the procurement laws and the procurement culture within clients, around the country, whether they're public or private, they're everything, right? And everybody's dealing with their own set of handcuffs, whatever it is in their organization that allows them to go left or right. So, not everybody can try everything at once.
Yeah, it's funny because the IFOA and the IPD agreement, all the things we've been working on like the last 20 years to try to just bring people on early, as I think of it as risk mitigation, because the more the less risk you have, because risk is just what you don't have, just what you don't know. But that effort started with Ian McNeil and these relational contracts. And when you get into the public sector, In Canada, you can't even buy a public official a cup of coffee because they're so paranoid about the appearance of a conflict of interest. And it seems like the public procurement is always about 20 years behind what's actually relevant and good and the rest of that. And you almost need not only your CAI study, but you need 300 examples of projects where, this stuff has worked. Now we have a database of projects that have worked, but when you and I were working at LCI, we just had this great aspiration and the knowledge that this could work. This is going to be great, but we just didn't have any, we didn't have any evidence to support it.
Right.
So interesting.
So now the facts remain that the underlying kind of key success factors they still keep popping up, right? In terms of, create a collaborative environment, get the builders involved early in design, less than 20% design complete, get the people closest to the work in the room to solve problems, right? Get the unknowns on the table so that the risk can be, mitigated, regardless of your delivery system or your contract. It's the fundamentals remain almost the same as they were 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's the transparency of that information gathering too, that team of teams and Stanley, I always have trouble with his last name, Chernowski or whatever his last name is, but that whole idea that there is a lot of information out there, and let's grab that information and not keep it to ourselves, which is really what's behind the opacity of our traditional delivery processes, right?
Sure.
I mean, I get into the validation period on IPD projects, and I say to an estimator, okay, so let's this is kind of Steve Elliott fashion, right? Let's open up your estimation software and let's find out what the assumptions are. Oh my God, can't do that. Oh, that would be the worst thing. I remember Steve telling us, I think maybe when we were in Cuba, that when he would take over a company, the first thing he would do is he would unpack their spreadsheets and try to get to the point where he could understand what their assumptions were, because assumptions are the things that just drive us, either drive us forward or drive us into the deep.
Right.
So I told you that I had taken the train from Ottawa to Vancouver.
Yeah, how was that?
That was fantastic, man. It was one of the great experiences. And not only was I, on the train with a bunch of crazy people, but Margaret Atwood, who wrote A Handmaid's Tale, she was on the train with her longtime partner. They were both in their 80s, and I met them for lunch. I just sat down with them, and I didn't know who she was. I didn't recognize her right off the bat. And so we were talking about what people do, and she said, "Oh, we're not retired. We're writers." And so the Nobel Prize winning literary author up here is Alice Munro, who's known for all of her short stories. So I said, "Are you Alice Munro?" And she goes, "No, I'm Margaret." I went, "Oh, that Margaret." So, but it was great. It was, I love trains, and I used to take the trains, all the time. As far as infrastructure in Canada, I don't even need a car here. There's so much great public transportation.
Right.
And I know that since they passed the infrastructure bill, the thing that I have always been waiting for in the States was, it's interstate high-speed rail, so that you wouldn't have to spend 3 hours at the airport, 2 hours searching for your bag later. You just walk into a train station, get on a train, and go someplace. So I'm really excited about your new role. So tell me what you see out there on the landscape in terms of developing that mode of transportation.
Well, it is fascinating, that's for sure. And I'm at least today, probably least qualified to talk about it because I'm so new to the rail sector, if you will, or the industry. But you're right, the funding is incredible. I mean, it's staggering what at least on paper, the government wants to infuse into the sector, almost so that the agencies, the entities, organizations that are going to receive it are scrambling, both on staffing and in process control and just being able to let the work as it's projected, right? So that's going to have to unfold. But that's exciting because the targets are there. It's identified, which states. It's no question that the Western states are certainly going to get more than their fair share because that's where the sector's going. But the thing that really is perplexing is that the large civil infrastructure transit projects that have been conducted, at least over the last 5 to 10 years, have really struggled mightily. Okay, for a variety of different reasons, right? You don't have to look far to read the stories, that are in the online to recognize that there are catastrophic losses up and down the books on these big infrastructure jobs, right? They're all, for the most part, either design build lump sum or they're DBFOM in a P3 model.
Right.
And the designers to the engineers to the contractors to the owners it's been tough, right? So there's really a movement. I've had the great fortune to meet a bunch of new competitors and A&Es over the last several weeks as I get more into the rail market, and several of them are curious and cautious about entering into those mega projects again under the current format, right? So there's a movement, at least in the water wastewater industry, and somewhat in the Class 1 freight world, to look more at CMGC to allow the big early risks of utilities and right-of-way security and things like that to unfold a bit more before making the grand decision on let's put together a JV or a tri-venture or even a quad venture of both designers and builders, and and off we go, right? Because
Right.
they're not ending well, I should say. So I'm excited about that, actually, because that's a space I'm very comfortable in. I mean, it reminds me of when we started talking about design build however many years ago, and it was a movement, right? So I believe that for that work to be let and to be successful in the era and in the timing that the US states need it, there's got to be a coalition of thinkers that want to make it successful early. And the procurement's going to have to be adjusted. There's going to have to be some flexibility there. Because I don't think the big players are going to continue to show up and take the lumps that I've seen.
Yeah, and that's what's happening up here in the P3 world.
Mhm.
And I remember a friend of mine was a judge in San Diego, where I lived for years. And one of the biggest P3 failures was the 125 tollway that they had built from
Okay.
Chula Vista to San Diego, Silicon Valley. And they opened it right around 2008, 2009, when everybody was getting their houses foreclosed on. And they had opened it to serve this huge housing development, hundreds of thousands of houses or something.
Yeah.
And that were all going into foreclosure because of the big collapse of the mortgage markets. And in Canada, people are very wary about P3s in terms of going after them. That's still a kind of, there are some people that are nostalgic about it because it provides for a way of maintaining projects that you never think of. But
True.
I worked on the first big infrastructure project up here, was an IPD for a bridge in Kingston, which has been going really well. And so I've been on panels with some alliancing guys and progressive design guys, and I've been pushing, IPD as a way of doing these larger projects, largely because you have so few trades on these things. On a bridge, Kiewit and Hatch, so you've got your engineer JV'd with a big civil constructor like Kiewit. They self-perform an awful lot of that work. They needed a steel partner. So they got the steel partner that I was just talking about, had put in a steel order on one of our projects down here. And you need an electrician and you need a kind of paving contractor, but Kiewit's that guy anyway. So the fewer trades that you have, the easier it is to kind of manage that expected cost and that target cost. And you don't set those things until you've done a really thorough validation piece. So it strikes me that it's a really good model for that. Up here, they do a lot of wastewater treatment plants that way,
Right.
$100 million and more.
Mhm.
And I'm working on about $2 billion worth of educational IPD projects up here, because healthcare is done by the state here and not private. So all the hospitals are built by Infrastructure Ontario or those things. But in the educational sector, that IPD has really taken off. And Canada sorely needs at least one more track west. And that's the development of rail resources to get timber from the forests and water across the country. They've got two really fantastic sustainable resources here: timber and water, and that nobody else in the world has.
Well,
and they need infrastructure to move it.
yeah. Well, it's certainly an exciting and thriving sector that is for rail, and Balfour Bees, fortunately, has a long and rich history in this sector. I was just up in Boston last week and actually wrote our new segment that we just opened up for MBTA, which is the Green Line segment up there, and I was able to ride the train, and everything was it's really quite nice what they're doing up there. The team's doing an amazing job. That job's coming to a close here before the end of the year. There's a big job for Caltrain, which is one of the first of its kind in California, to convert a diesel locomotive system to full electrification. And that's especially for the rail group here, which is exciting. And that's where I have the most to learn, right? Because you're talking about traction power, through overhead catenary systems and all the signals and comms and integration that goes with it. So it's a fascinating scope of work, and we're certainly doing that actively right now at LAX for the LAWA, automated people mover.
Right.
So these projects, they're challenging, but they're moving, they're making progress, right? And there's a whole market within that market too. In terms of what existing passenger and transit systems are dealing with in terms of aging infrastructure, right? All these cities that have transit systems, they're operating them, they're maintaining them. There's lots to do around the U.S. in terms of the rail sector.
Right, and those rails go over bridges, and they also promote
Right.
other industries. Like rail
Yeah.
typically is built out of steel, and the steel
Yeah.
shortages our reliance on Chinese steel has not served us necessarily well.
Mhm.
So I would expect to see those rural steel mills that are a
Yeah.
quarter of the size of a Bessemer process start popping up all over the place, because there's such a demand for the supply chain for big infrastructure,
Mhm.
and it's not just asphalt, as they say up here, which drives me crazy.
Well, if you ever defect from Canada, there's a thriving market down here for you.
Yeah, well, I love it down there. I love it up here. It's been
I
really
can imagine. There's more
been really
rinks up
great.
there.
And then when they had the convoy in Ottawa, I
Yeah.
was right here in the geographic center of the convoy, right in the geographic center of the red zone. It was like, oh my God, how they let all these Americans up here?
Yeah, that's
What
right.
happened? Well, this has been great catching up, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just the last couple of words. What do you see in the future out there, not only for you, but for Balfour and the segment, the construction industry too? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, look, I mean, everybody has their own opinion on it. To me, it hits back on the topic of people, right? And leaders leaders take time to develop people, and it's an investment both directions, right? There's the concept of reverse mentoring, and there's so much we can learn from each other. But layers of leadership inside of organizations and inside of projects is crucial, right? And it takes a certain level of humility and confidence and trust to allow others to take the reins and just show what they can do. And I'm always amazed that when you challenge people, what you get back, right? So developing people to me is only has to increase and continue for our industry. Um, to really survive and grow, right? And that's the same for me. I mean, I've really come to appreciate the talents and unique aspects that people bring to our team. And that's why I've been so enthused here over the last several weeks. And it's been a new venture for me, but I'm meeting new people, people that are way smarter than me about many, many things, which, fortunately, one of my top talents, I'm a learner, right? So I love to dive in and, steal ideas from others and try to make them better and look for new partnerships, right? So, for our rail business, it's grow rail, right? We want to grow rail because there's a lot of it out there to do. I think people need us and need companies like us, right? So it's that's exciting. But that those would be the two things for me, Dick.
It's fantastic. So it just gets back to continuous improvement and respect for people. What a
Exactly.
concept. How did
That's
we
right.
stumble on that one? That's weird. Well, Mark, it's been great. Say hi to Jen and the kids, and
Will do.
I look forward to seeing you soon on a train someplace.
Very good.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.